A really good sturdy picture frame. This one is a thrift shop special. It's 12 by 16 inches, which is 30.4 centimeters by 40.7 centimeters. The 12 by 16 works, it's quite, it's a nice size to work from. I'm also going to be showing you how to build a stand for the loom, which makes working on the loom just wonderful, and it also makes the warping go really well too. Now, you're going to need a drill, because the first thing you're going to do is you're going to drill holes, 1/4 inch holes, at the exact center point of the long side of the loom, because you're going to, when you're mounting it on the loom frame, loom stand, you'll be putting a carriage bolt through here to go to the stand. You're also going to put 1/4 inch graph paper exactly centered on the short sides of the loom. And the reason for that is because you want to have a little bit of help with your figuring out how many ends per inch you're going to put on your loom. And by, pardon me, by having the graph paper, that allows you to place your warp strands quite precisely. Now, for one of the sheds, you'll need a shed stick. And what I did was I took an old yardstick and I put pointed ends on both ends of the yardstick. It's going to go into the loom once it's warped, every other thread, and then when you turn it on your side, that will open one of the sheds. To open the other shed, you're going to have a shed stick that string heddles will go over, and you'll be pulling those the strings will go around the warp strands, and as you lift your heddle stick, that will open the second shed. I drilled holes so that I can put, after I've got my heddles on, I'll be able to tie a string across to keep them on there, because it can, especially if you're carrying it, this stick can migrate out of the heddles, which is not the best. Now, you could just lift the stick, but it's much better to have little blocks that will hold up the heddle stick. And hopefully that's showing up. Is that showing up? No, it's not showing up very well. I've got my tripod set up on the table here. There. Hopefully you can see there. And so the heddle stick will go into the notch. The way that I make the blocks for the heddle stick is to take a 6-inch long piece of 1/4 inch plywood, and it is that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So that's 1.5 inches wide by 6 inches long. I draw a line at the center point, which is 3 inches, and then I drilled a 3/4 inch hole centered on the lateral and vertical point, so that the hole is centered on that. I drilled 2 little holes in the end so that the screws will fit through there, and then I cut the piece of wood in half and sanded them, and that gives me my heddle blocks. So I'm going to just stop the camera and glue and screw the heddle blocks into the frame. I'm going to glue them I've drawn a line that is 3 inches from, this is actually the top, I've got it turned around, this is the top of the loom, 3 inches from the top, although right now it's sitting at the bottom. And I'm going to screw and glue the heddle blocks in, and then I'll come back and talk to you about the tensioning device. So I'll be right back after a little, just a little bit of construction here. So you can see I've got the heddle blocks screwed and glued to the loom. So the next thing that I'll need to have is a stand for warping, and as well 2 dowels that have holes drilled 2 inches from the end. Now, depending on the size of your loom, I made them about 14 inches long. I should have, I'm a little off, it's a little wonky, but you know what, it's still going to work. The way that the warping, the tensioning device works is that it's going to go on the back of the loom, and it'll be held in place by shoelaces holding the bolts to the frame. And then I will use, I cut a dog bone shape of cardboard, and I'm going to wrap this with warp, and then the warp will be passed through the strands and go around the loom and come back and go around, so that you'll see once I'm actually doing it, just that what'll happen is we'll have one end of the warp strands wrapped around this dowel, one end wrapped around this dowel, and then to tighten the warp, I will tighten up the wing nuts. It works beautifully. This is a system that I learned from the Jane Redman frame loom weaving book, and it's just totally excellent. It works great. So you can also make shuttles for yourself out of, I use old rulers, and I cut them up, and they make excellent shuttles. So you can have looms that are really great looms for very little money. Yes, you do need a drill, and you need to be able to saw and sand things, but tools like that are really worthwhile owning, and so I think it's a great investment. So get yourself a drill and a saw and some glue and some sandpaper, and then you can start shopping around for upcycled materials, reclaimed and recycled and upcycled, and make yourself a marvelous loom. Next, what I'm going to show you how to do is how to build a stand for your frame loom. And I'm going to grab the phone, so time to edit. So there is the frame loom ready to warp up. I'll need to make some thread, or well, strong string heddles for the heddle bar, and then and I also need to build the stand, and the stand is going to be a separate video that will be entitled How to Build a Loom Stand from Recycled Stuff by Noreen Crone-Findlay. That's me, of course. So in the How to Build the Loom Stand, I'm going to show you how we warp the frame loom. Or maybe I should do that as a separate. So I'll just go gather up my warping stuff, and then we can warp. Okay, so I have heddles now around each of the raised warp strands, and hopefully it'll show up. I have taken a strand of cotton and gone through the hole at this end and through the hole at this end and tied a knot so that it goes, it captures the heddles and the heddle bar can't go flying out when the loom is moved. So what I'm going to do now is turn the shed stick flat, take it out, and you can see that when I lift the heddle bar up and pop it into the heddle blocks, here we go, there we are, that opens one of the sheds. So what I want to do now is to have the shed stick in the other shed. And so what I will do is when I was, I'm going to weave over, under again. When I was lifting the warp strands that I put the heddles on, I started by going under the first one and over the second one. To get the next shed, I will now go over the first one and under the second, and I just simply weave my shed stick across, over undering, and this is going to give me my second shed. So when I flip the shed stick on its side, I will have the second shed. Now, when you finish your warping, backing up a little bit here, I just wanted to pass along a little tip here. Check that you haven't got any warp strands crossed in the gap between the front strands and the back strands, because if you do, you're going to need to take out those warp strands, work your way back to there and fix it, because otherwise it'll be all big time messy. Okay, so I've woven across, and so now when I want to, I think I've still got my tension a bit tight. So when I want to open one shed, I just flip my shed stick over, and that opens the shed in front of the warping blocks. And when I want to, then I will push it up to the top of the loom, and to open the second shed, I just lift my heddle rod and pop it into the heddle blocks, and there you have it, both sheds. And so now that you have two sheds, you can weave up a storm, and you can work the entire length, well, not quite the entire length. By advancing the warp, you can move the warp strands. You'll have to loosen your tension and bring the warp strands around the loom. So happy weaving on a wonderfully low cost but highly functional loom and stand made from recycled, upcycled, and reclaimed materials. Happy weaving. Talk to you soon. Bye for now. So I've turned the loom upside down. I just pivoted around, and I've tied the tensioning device on, which is the two dowels with the 1/4 inch lag bolts that are, I think they're 3 inches or 3.5 inches long. Any length will do, no shorter than 3 inches, so because you want to be able to get your warp through there. And I have wound my warp onto onto the dog bone shaped cardboard bobbin, and now I'm going to start warping. I will turn my loom around so that the warping device is on the bottom part, and I'm going to ask my husband if he would mind coming and just filming while I do that, while I do the actual warping. So I'll just zip away for a second and then come right back. I've made a couple of changes to the loom. I was not happy with the two dowels that I was using for the tension device because I had gotten one of the holes out of line, and so it was pulling out of line, and that doesn't work to give you even tension on the loom when you're warping. And so I just took two square sticks and I drilled a 1/4 inch hole in each one at each end so that I can put the lag bolt through or carriage bolt through, and with the wing nut on it with the gap between for tensioning my warp. Now what I do to put the warp on the loom is to take the warp, it goes over the top of the loom, and then you go under, bring it up through in the space between the two tension rods, and go around it, go around the lower one here at the bottom, and there it comes under the loom now and over the top. I'm going to go to the top of the loom, up to the top, and you want to keep the tension even. I'm holding the video camera in one hand trying to do this, and it's not easy to do. And okay, I'm going to put the camera down, and there we go, the tripod was not cooperating. Okay, and so then the warp goes, again, it'll go under the tension rod, and I need to let out enough warp so I can bring it up in the space between. If you ever end up with warp strands going across this gap, you're going to have to take that out because that's just wrong. You won't be able to tension your warp or advance your warp if you do that. Once the tensioning device is taken off, I've got it tied on with shoelaces. Once you take it off, and you can advance the warp by loosening the tension on the tension device by undoing the wing nuts. But if you have your warp going through the gap here, that's not going to allow you to advance your warp. That's not a good thing. Okay, so then what you do is you go back under so that you come out on top of the loom. You don't have to have really, really tight tension when you're doing the warping. It just needs to be quite even. And when you tighten the wing nuts, that's what's going to give you your tight tension. Tight tension is for tapestry weaving. If you're going to be doing a tabby weave or a weft, a balanced weft and warp weave, then don't put a huge amount of tension on your warp because you'll want to have some slack there, and you'll need that for a balanced weave. But for weft face weave like tapestry, then you do have the very tight tension, and this loom allows you to have the variations in the tension that you need. So that's what you do. You just go around your bar and then up and under and over either the upper or the lower part of the crossbar of the loom, and that's how you warp all the way across until you've got it as wide as you would like it to be. So I'm going to finish up with the warping. I'm putting it on at 6 ends per inch, so every once in a while I need to stop and make sure that I've got 6 ends per inch. And once I am warped across the loom, I'll come back and show you how to put the heddles on the loom. Because once you've got your heddles on, then you can start weaving. Woohoo! Okay, so I'm just going to do a bit more warping and I'll be back. I have finished warping and I tightened the wing nuts on the tensioning device, and I got very enthusiastic and I made it so tight that when I wove in the first shed stick, I couldn't turn the shed stick on its side, so I had to enthusiastically loosen up my tension so that I could actually raise the tension the shed stick so that I could get the heddles happening and get a shed to open. So you'll just have to try that out and see, and when you know how much tension is enough or how much is too much. So what I've done is I have woven under, over, under, over, under, over, all the way across with my shed stick. I'm going to turn it on its side now, and I am going to, I've made heddles, string heddles, which are loops of thread. I'm just taking them off the pin they were on, that are, they are about, let me just measure them, they are 3 inches. So they're 6 inches in length with the knot. I have a video on making the string heddles, and you can go and check that out. It's a quick and easy way to make the string heddles. So I have a whole bunch of them made, and I will put them onto my fingers to make it easier to well, actually I won't, because that takes too much time. I suppose I could edit and come back, but normally I would open them all up and put them on 2 fingers like this, so that they are all on my fingers, which does make it easier for putting them on the heddle bar. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my heddle bar and hold it in my right hand, and I'm going to take the heddle under the first warp strand and then put both ends of the loop onto the heddle bar. I'll take the next heddle and do the same thing, going across and putting the loops onto the heddle bar. And you want to have your knots on top of the heddle bar. You don't want your knots down in the warp strands, getting caught up in the warp strands. So we're going to go all the way across, picking up each of the raised warp strands and putting a heddle loop under the warp strand, bringing it up and putting both ends of the loop onto the heddle bar. So I'm going to finish doing that. I'm going to work my way all the way across the loom, picking up the wrapping a heddle around each of the raised warp strands, and then I'll come back. And here is the first piece that I have woven on the frame loom. I found that weaving on the frame loom is absolutely a delight. It's just it's a pleasure. What can I say? It's really nice to work on. Here's the, this is the heddle stick. And notice I've tied a strand of thread just to hold I drilled a hole in there. I don't remember if I showed that or not. Um, there's a hole in each end with then the strand of thread, yarn, thin yarn, holding the heddles on, just in case the stick slips. That way you won't lose your heddles. And I used a yardstick as the shed stick, and I used torn up fabric strips that I didn't. I've never done a tapestry using torn up fabric strips before, but because the project that I was building this for required that everything be done with things that had been thrown away or would have been thrown away if they hadn't gone to the reuse center or thrift shops. That was my main source, was to use fabric strips and t-shirts, and so that's how the yarn for the little planet Earth was made, and the sparkly deep space. So all in all, I am absolutely thrilled with the loom and stand that I've made from trash into treasure. And so it just goes to show that you can make a wonderful loom and stand for very little money indeed. The only purchase parts were the nuts and bolts that hold the, and the tools to build it too, saw and drill, and some glue.